for you. So this is Dr. Paul Gibson Roy is a restoration ecologist specialising in re-establishing species-rich native grasslands and grassy woodlands. In 2004, he investigated the Victorian Grassy Ground Cover Project, instigated project through Melbourne University and Greening Australia, a statewide field-scale grassy restoration program. In 2011, he expanded the project to New South Wales, focusing on EPBC-listed Cumberland Plain grassy woodland. There he developed one of the country's most advanced seed production facilities, growing wildflowers and grasses for restoration across the region. He was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2016 and toured the USA investigating their native seed and restoration sectors. In 2017, he co-developed an ANPC-led native seed sector survey, gathering critical information and feedback from restorationists nationally. In 2019, he joined Kalbar Resources to oversee rehabilitation strategies for the Fingerboards project in East Gippsland, Victoria. These include ambitious goals to restore nationally listed grassy woodland to approximately 200 hectares of the post-mined landscape. This will involve developing significant seed production capacity to underpin seed resource needs for that restoration. So that's pretty incredible, and clearly I think really sort of comes down to everything that we're talking about today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Paul to give our final presentation. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Aggie. Cool. Well, I think you can hear me, and I think that echo will disappear. It seems to have for everyone else. Wow, what a morning. And John, for heaven's sakes, I just about gave you a standing ovation here in Coloroy after that. I'm sure lots of other people were thinking the same thing, and the same goes for all the other speakers. What a great morning. So it sounds like all of us have been talking before this and putting our heads together and saying what we're going to talk about today. I know that wasn't the case, but there's an enormous amount of overlap. So what I'm going to talk about resonates with just about what everyone else has spoken with, both the Johns, Lincoln, Aggie, Amy, whatnot. So I think we're all starting to sort of, sing from the same hymn book, so to speak. Thanks. It's so exciting anyway, as well, to be talking from the Glen Alcock sort of area. I've had so much great memories of working down there. The stuff I'm going to talk about now, I will focus on that, but I think some of the stuff obviously has a much wider application. So seed production, underpinning, innovative approaches to grassland restoration. There's an awesome little shot there of Woorndoo again at the Common, just some of the houses in the background. So again, it's John and everyone are talking, what are we trying to preserve in these gorgeous landscapes? It's a whole bunch of stuff. It's biodiversity, it's rarity, whether that's annuals or perennials or orchids or whatever your thing is, whether it's red gums, whatever. We're after habitat, and as John said, we're after function. We want these things to really work together. But it's more than that, isn't it, really? It's beauty. Look at these damn things. They're gorgeous, even when they're not in flower. We're talking about history. We're talking about our history of our life. We're talking about history of our generations. We're talking about history that goes back tens of thousands of years. And in that same sort of thing, culture. So recent culture, historical culture, long-term culture. We're talking about whimsy. We're talking about hope. So this is really a big deal. And I think all of us, really got to take this sort of stuff seriously. So, when you start to see these beautiful little pockets of, what I'm sort of just flicking through here, you can see there diversity, whimsy, you can see all those gaps and function. You can get a sense that things are working in that. John mentioned things like Thai lotus, nestled in there between all the lovely grasses and the big red gums in the background. What a sight, boy. You want to roll around and stuff like this. Look at that again. These are the very important landscapes. And as John just, talked about, we're watching them disappear. Now, we're doing better than we have for many years in terms of conservation, but they're still going backwards. We know we're still losing them. So as John pointed out, we've got to conserve, we've got to enhance, and we've got to restore. These things are just too wondrous to let slip through our hands. And again, you know, roadsides, little commons, again, you know, these little common landscapes where we've got, you know, agriculture. John Del Prat earlier talked about themata, you know, these beautiful themata grasslands. Aggie talked about them. Amy talked about them in terms of their summer green growth and lower biomass, you know, the floral diversity, you know, grassy woodlands, you know, grasslands, grassy woodlands, that sort of weird continuum. So these things can morph and they are all really important landscapes. So again, that's sort of what I'm talking about, and really just flowing on from what everyone else was speaking about. So what do the grasslands that, you know, all those beautiful little things that I've just gone through have in common? Well, you know, function, beauty, rarity, all those wonderful things. Here's a few other things. They were all restored grasslands. Now, and again, I'm, you know, sort of not blowing anyone's trumpet here. A lot of people have been investing time and energy in this, as John Del Prat pointed out earlier. This sort of stuff demonstrates that we can put back grasslands to a really high standard. So 20, 30 years ago, if you'd sort of said, you know, that you could roll out that set of pictures that I've just put forward, and that they would all be restored grasslands, you would have been howled down or laughed out of a room. Here we are, 20, 30 years later, a whole bunch of people have invested an awful lot of time and effort, and that's where we've got to. So that is an incredible thing, because as John said, we're watching these things almost disappear, and we're at a point where the extinction debt is right before us, so we could plummet further off a cliff. So the fact that we can do what you've just seen is world-changing in terms of grassland world, okay, or grassy woodland world. But here's the other really big thing. All those grasslands that you've just seen all relied on seed production to some degree to supply the seed in the quantity. We can't get it from the landscape because they're so rare in quantity. The quality, John Morgan talked about seed quality. You know, how do we get the quality of seed to either propagate the plants or to do the direct seeding, as Dave Franklin was doing in an early shot? And how do we get the diversity to enhance, to put back structural complexity, species complexity? Seed production allows us the way to do that. All those sites were from locations where, and these are big critical points, they took a lot of effort to sort of figure out those what seemed like fairly simple points, but that weed seed and nutrient loads have been modified. So essentially we're talking about nutrient loads from agronomic or arable landscapes being reduced so that they're more in line with what would have been an historic nutrient level, and also removing some of that weed seed load that's been reintroduced by agriculture. So here we go. Why seed production isn't so critical. Again, seed productions, as I said, they reduce the impact of repeated collection on our wild populations. Wild populations are still critical because that's where you get your genetic resource for seed production. But seed production uses a range of techniques that we've spent thousands of years, in Australia even, many people would argue tens of thousands of years, developing methods of treating and agronomic horticultural learning to work with plants so that we can grow them for seed or whatever purposes, cultural purposes. So we use those agronomic and horticultural techniques to grow a wide range. There's a whole different range of different ways that seed production can work. There's no one system fits all. A whole bunch of species can be grown on those different ranges, and you can see just a couple of shots there. You can produce high quality seed for direct seeding or propagating plants. Numerous genetic individuals can be grown in relatively small areas, and they allow a high level of management over many of the things that will, shorten seed production in the wild, whether that's sheep coming on, wildfire, drought or whatnot. You can control all those factors. Here's a couple others that I point out, and John's talk and others' talks sort of prompted me to think this. Bringing in critical species like annuals. Again, we can bring those into seed production and set up crops and populations in production so that those things can produce the amounts of seed to go back into the wild. Same thing for rare and threatened species. They can be very critical. You can see some of the things I'm talking about here in terms of the basic elements of seed production. You can see here that these plants are growing essentially in monocultures. They're growing in modified soils or in areas where weeds have been strictly controlled. Moisture is being supplied. These systems can be very simple, and as you can see here, those sorts of systems are ideal for, small groups. You've got a farm, you want to emboss your native vegetation in and around the farm over a period of years. You can set up a very simple system. Land care groups and people like that can set up these sort of systems. They can increase in complexity. You see a shot there at the bottom of John standing near some containers at David Franklin's. Again, varying levels of sophistication of containerized systems. And there you can see in the ground as a field plot. But these things can be done at larger scales when you're talking about supplying seed for larger areas, for example, for regions or LGAs, for things like that. So again, a lovely shot on the top right of Chris Finlay, Kate Hill at Flora Vic. Wonderful job setting up grass production. Other people have done it. Here's some sites that I've been involved with a lovely team of people, including Sam Craig and a whole bunch of others in New South Wales. Again, you can see large scale production. Here, there's probably over 150 species growing of Cumberland Plains species. Now, these things, this particular site represented the largest, accumulation of those species in that region. And that produces seed to go back into the landscape. Again, scale, I'll just flick through these, but it gives you some idea of what's involved. You can grow these things at, agronomic scale. You need sheds and things in the background to produce them. Again, you can set up large crops of things like wildflowers and daisies and lilies. But what you're aiming for is these large volumes of seed for harvest, and obviously then for storage and use. So again, some of the infrastructure when you're scaling up these sort of things. So John Del Pratt talked about it earlier about jobs and economy. These are the sort of things that we need to probably work towards in regional levels, where we're setting up systems where people essentially are getting a viable work career out of these things. And that's what you need to do this sort of stuff at scale. So again, here's some of those pictures that I described. They're all restored grasslands, and all of them relied on seed production to do that. So more than anything, this tells us that we really need to take seed production seriously. And I don't think at all that that's been the case over the last 20 years. And I think that's a crying shame that organisations like DELP and CMA, same thing in New South Wales, local land services, state departments, need to focus on seed production and provide support for developing seed production capacity. So how do I see this going in terms of the possibilities? So again, I'm really going to tag team with John Morgan again here, and I'm focusing here on the Glenelg region, but of course, what I'm talking about, I believe very strongly, goes much beyond that. The applications go beyond that. But what's unique about the Glenelg, Woorndoo, Hamilton, whatever region, is that there has been some extraordinary work done there that ties together different sort of examples of what other people have spoken about, that says, okay, we've tested a whole bunch of things here. Can we start putting these together in a more cohesive framework along the lines of what John Morgan was talking about to progress over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 odd years? So here are the key elements. People have been doing some very serious stuff since at least 2005. I know probably before that. There's been seed production capacity, albeit small and albeit not particularly well supported, but It's there in your region. So you've got some wonderful people who have been spending time in doing this. You've got some wonderful enthusiastic support in that region. You have some of the best remnant communities in Victoria. Now, that's a great joy and essentially a great responsibility. So you've got all those elements. And again, I'm just going to flick through that. So these are completely separate to the earlier shots I showed you, restore grasslands. But I want you to sort of dwell on this top sort of section here, because it will make some sense in a little while, I hope, if any of what I'm saying makes sense. The farm-based restoration. So there have been restorations on farm in that region. Now, I'm talking about Moyston here. Strictly speaking, I think it's in the Wimmera catchment, but it's just up the road. This paddock here, essentially, when we started here, looked exactly like the Cape Wee paddock. It was just an extension of that. So the whole thing looked like that. We seeded it, we scalped it, we took away the weed load. It wasn't a particularly big nutrient load. There it is with a wallaby grass sward. It wasn't a particularly high diversity seed mix, it was a grassy mix. There it is in 2007. What a handsome man. There it is in 2011. There it is in 2017. So again, it was at a time of the year when there wasn't a lot of biomass. You can see here that the Cape weed's still in the other paddock, but essentially it hasn't got into here. Why I'm showing you this is because, again, it's very important for us to understand, do these things persevere? Are they able to maintain their structure and integrity? This was always a simple grassland. It's maintained its simplicity. So, as John was saying, we could enhance that. But it's been structurally stable. That's a very important thing. Here's a farm-based restoration in Chatsworth at Dave Franklin's place. So there's Dave in 2007. We scalped it in 2006. You can see the pioneers going in there, the wallaby grass. There it is in 2011. John Del Pratt was talking about later, the thermiter takes a while to come through. There it is. There's the thermiter. There it is. Dave sent me a picture of this a few weeks ago. It's now a lot of wallaby grass in there. These things wax and wane. It depends on, when you're looking at it, what the conditions are locally. Here's another one in Hamilton, farm-based restoration. Again, on an agronomic, this is at the research centre. There it is in 2008. So you can see the grasses, the forbs. Look at that. Wonderful. 2009, 2010, 2017. Still complex, still stable. Obviously there are management issues around that, but you can see that these things have maintained themselves over time. Now that's a really important thing, because people are questioning, and some are very much doubting. I certainly know in New South Wales, I've heard it in Victoria, in South Australia, people are questioning whether you go to all these efforts to restore a grassland and they just fall apart at some point. Well, it's not for me to say whether or not they are perfect, but here is some evidence to suggest that under certain conditions, with certain setting up parameters, that these sites that I'm showing you have persevered over a decade, and in some cases near 15 years. Here's another one. Dave Franklin did this for the Dunkeld Pastoral Company. Again, this is just a shot I took of it. But again, demonstrating that you can put together these key elements of a grassland that John Morgan would say you might then enhance. Woorndoo, John Del Pratt showed this earlier, 1 year site. Here's their early site, 7 years on. Now, for heaven's sakes, most of us, whether we're botanists or students or whatever, if you'd stumbled upon that grassland and didn't know where it would come from, you would say, oh, of course, that's an historic grassland. So just the fact, and this is a roadside, sorry, I missed my key point. These have been established on roadsides. So really important factor. We've got Farmside, roadside. Here again, John Morgan very kindly showed these shots of the Wycliffe sites. These were just containing completely woody trees. So these, and you might know the Wycliffe site. Sorry, someone's exiting. The Wycliffe sites are beautiful remnants along this, but these were weedy patches in between. So there it is in 2010, 2017. And I'll just talk to, John was talking about benefits of connections. So here we are, we've connected here and here. You can see here that we've found that a lot of the species, like leucochrysum and others, have extended out into the remnant. So we've got movement of species out of here that weren't there originally. We've also got species moving from those remnants into these sites. So things like drosseras, and we've got orchids moving in. So that connectivity movement, we've already been able to see that this actually does work in Australia. So that's a wonderful thing. There it is in 2017. I got these shots this morning from Frank Carlin. So these are just some shots. He was out there recently. That site has a very large population now of rudidosis, the button wrinklewort. So again, there's 4 naturally threatened species in here, but that represents a very large population of button wrinklewort. Here's another one up the road. So again, 2010, 2017, and here's a shot from just the other day. Chris Finlay sent me this. So again, these things are maintaining their integrity under the conditions that they were set up and under the conditions under which they've been managed. And on this roadside, it's been the annual burns from the wonderful CMA group. So how does this all fit together? Okay, so we've got these wonderful examples in the Glenelg region, but well beyond that, in different parts of Victoria, in South Australia, Andrew Fenny, Sean Thompson, you know, the Finlays and others of the world in New South Wales, the Craigies, Tim Berryman's, others doing work in New South Wales. We know it can be done on farms. We see from Glenelg Hopkins that it can be done on roadsides as well. Now, those roadside corridors are very critical because we have some access to land that potentially can be used, and essentially trying to get rid of those, you know, sort of high biomass phalaris landscapes. But I've come up with what I'm terming farmside roadside restoration. There you go. There's my stab at immortality. Farmside roadside restoration. So I'm trying to find a way that we can put all these elements together of what John Dill Pratt was talking about, what John Morgs was talking about, and what a whole bunch of other people were talking about, Lincoln and others. So we use roadside restoration to link remnant grasslands. So we've already done that at Wycliffe, and we've done it to a certain degree in other places. We use roadside restoration to recreate grassland on areas of roadside where it just wasn't there. Woorndoo's, the Land Care Group, has done that. We use farmside restoration, farmside, I'll talk about that in a little bit more, to expand the roadside corridor to try and increase the extent and complexity and function of roads remnants on roadsides. So we know we can do it on farms. We've done it. So we're just putting the two together, and we use those farmside and roadsides to improve species diversity, bring in the annuals, bring in the perennials, bring in grasses that have moved out, bring in the rare and threatened. Now this presents for us an opportunity to work collaboratively. So we can bring in the CMAs, the LGAs, Vic Roads, landholders, seed growers, seed productionists, restorationists, the CMA, the community, all those groups can work together on something like this. There is not only the potential, but the need then for resource sharing, the sharing of equipment, whether that's in site prep or site management, expertise, things like that. What this model proposes is that it takes up a very small area of a farm side, essentially, you know, strips, linear strips, effectively equivalent to the roadside remnant, and linear and wide, and I'll show you that. And in terms of the management, a lot of people will talk about, oh, scalping, this is the end of the world of topsoil removal, but essentially you're just shifting that topsoil back into the farm footprint. So that's where it's wanted, that's where the nutrients are wanted, and that really reduces the cost because you're not really moving things a long way. So the key elements are seed production. You need seed production to do this. You need to incentivise farmers, so farm rental payments. This is what I saw in America, and they've programs over there in America have established millions of hectares of restored grassland on farms and on roadsides by incentivising farmers through farm rental payments. So they contribute to setup costs, and then there's an ongoing rental payment. And in America, it's done over 10-year blocks. But we could do something similar like that once we got out of something like a trial program. And then a lot of coordination with the planning groups to assist either the landholders or the roadside groups in terms of site prep, restoration and management. So what does it look like? I've just taken a picture of the Glenelg Highway, but this is what I think it would look like in practice. And in truth, this is what it already has started. So that this particular shot shows one of the grassland remnants, that the roadside restorations that I showed you earlier. So it would involve, here we go, we've got roadside remnants. You're connecting the remnants by restoration. So you're increasing the roadside corridor, as Morgs was saying. You're increasing the connectivity. But here's the cool thing about this. By taking very small amounts of the farm side part, essentially that fence there doesn't become the barrier. You move your fence line back into the farm, so you're really only talking 20, 30, 40, 50 metres. Many landholders are very open to this. I know a whole bunch of farmers who have said to me time and time again, I would like to do more of this. This isn't eating into a huge amount of the farm income. This is a very small area. And again, if they're incentivised, the area of land loss is small, but if they're compensated for that in terms of what they would have produced there, then again, it becomes a part of their farm system. But all of a sudden, by doing this, you've doubled your road corridor. And if you're pushing these things along strategic corridors, all of a sudden you're going from a 2 or 3 chain road to a 6 chain corridor. Could you imagine this? If this is Wycliffe at one end up here and we've got Dunkeld at the other, you're working for the next 20 years, all of a sudden you've got this beautiful big long 6 chain corridor of roadside, farmside remnant. Boy, I'm almost jumping up and down in my little seat here in Coleroy. So what are the potential outcomes? There's a whole bunch of them. You've got reliable seed availability through your seed production. You've got to support a regional seed production capacity. So that's a very important, it's a key point. And when you do that, you've got seed on an ongoing basis. You know, you can plan for it. You can strategically manage what you're trying to do. You've got continual enhancement of degraded roadsides back to native vegetation. So you're getting rid of all that phalaris and you're returning it to native vegetation. You're significantly increasing the roadside footprint for grasslands. You're enhancing cooperation between landholders and public agencies, and that's got to be a good thing. We need to do more of that. You're providing financial and environmental incentives for farmers. So there are environmental and environmental service benefits from farmers as well, but there also needs to be financial ones. Wildflower trails for tourism. Could you imagine in your region, you've got 20, 30, 40, 60 kilometre corridors of those beautiful landscapes. They will become a trail for tourism, whether it's for cultural, for the local Indigenous people, for local people from towns, for Wycliffe and Hamilton or wherever it is. People are coming to these. And in America, there are huge wildflower trails that extend, hundreds of kilometres, because road agencies there have invested over 20 and 30 years in restoring native vegetation to their roadside. So it can be done. And again, here's the other fantastic thing. These are low biomass fuel load roads. So again, they'll reduce management fees. And here's the other stuff: biodiversity, habitat, rarity, function, beauty, culture, history, whimsy, there's the artist in me, and more. So my take-home stuff, there is that stupid little fellow in the wildflowers. Please be brave. You've got to be brave to do this. We can't just sit around hoping this stuff happens. We've done enough now to really understand the key elements. We've got to put them together. So be brave and make it happen, because it can be done. Thank you very much.
That was absolutely brilliant, Paul. I think everyone will agree that was